Vincent Chin's story didn't begin on the night of June 19, 1982. It began decades earlier in Highland Park, Michigan, where he spent most of his childhood in the 1960s. His parents, Lily and Hing Chin, had immigrated to the United States, seeking a better life. Hing Chin, a Chinese immigrant, had adopted Vincent as his own son after marrying Lily, a war widow from China. In 1971, after Hing was mugged, the family moved to Oak Park, Michigan, a quieter suburb. Vincent graduated from Oak Park High School in 1973 and went on to study at Control Data Institute and Lawrence Tech. By 1982, he had built a life that reflected his ambitions and dreams. He worked as an industrial draftsman at Efficient Engineering, an automotive supplier, and waited tables on weekends at the Golden Star restaurant in Ferndale. But Vincent's life wasn't just about work. He was engaged to Vicky Wong, and their wedding was just days away, scheduled for June 28, 1982. On June 19, he was celebrating his bachelor party with his friends Jimmy Choi, Gary Koivu, and Robert Sirusky at the Fancy Pants Club in Highland Park. It was supposed to be a night of joy and celebration. Instead, it turned into a tragedy that would change the lives of many and expose the deep fractures of racism and economic resentment in America. At the time, Detroit was in the midst of an economic crisis. The decline of the American auto industry had devastated the city, and many blamed the rise of Japanese car imports. Politicians like Michigan Representative John Dingell openly scapegoated Japan, using racist rhetoric to fuel anti-Asian sentiment. Nationwide, campaigns to buy American often carried the same undertones. This was the climate in which Vincent Chin found himself that night. Seated across the stage from him and his friends at the Fancy Pants Club were Ronald Ebens, a Chrysler plant supervisor, and his stepson Michael Nitz, a laid-off auto worker. Tensions rose after Vincent gave a white stripper a generous tip. Ebens, already intoxicated from drinking earlier in the evening, began hurling racial slurs. According to witnesses, Ebens shouted, "Hey, you little motherfuckers," and directed further insults at an African-American dancer, saying, "Don't pay attention to those little furs. They wouldn't know a good dancer if they'd seen one." Racine Colwell, one of the dancers, later testified that Ebens added, "It's because of you little motherfuckers that we're out of work." Ebens would later claim the argument wasn't about race, but about the gratuity given to the black dancer. However, the racial undertones of his words were undeniable, and they would later serve as key evidence in civil rights litigation. Ebens claimed that Vincent walked over and punched him in the jaw. The fight escalated quickly. Nitz, attempting to defend his stepfather, shoved Vincent, and Vincent retaliated. Chairs were picked up and swung. Nitz suffered a cut on his head from a chair that Ebens had intended to use on Vincent. The bouncer intervened, separating the groups and escorting Ebens and Nitz to the restroom to clean up the wound. Outside, the conflict reignited. Vincent and his friends were waiting for Robert Sirusky, who had gone back inside to use the restroom. When Ebens and Nitz exited the club, Vincent called Ebens a chicken shit. This was the breaking point. Nitz retrieved a baseball bat from his car, and Vincent and his friends ran down the street. But Ebens and Nitz weren't willing to let it go. They spent the next 20 to 30 minutes searching for Vincent and even paid another man $20 to help them look. Their hunt ended at a nearby McDonald's, where they found Vincent. Vincent tried to escape, but Nitz held him in place, while Ebens swung the bat. Witnesses described the attack as brutal, with Ebens striking Vincent repeatedly, aiming for his head. One off-duty police officer, who witnessed the attack, said Ebens swung the bat as if he were going for a home run. The blows were so severe that Vincent's skull cracked open. The two off-duty officers at the scene immediately arrested Ebens and called for an ambulance. Vincent was rushed to Henry Ford Hospital, but the damage was already done. He was comatose upon arrival and never regained consciousness. 4 days later, on June 23, 1982, Vincent Chin died from his injuries. He was only 27 years old. Vincent's death wasn't just the loss of a young man with a bright future ahead of him. It was the result of a lethal combination of racism, economic scapegoating, and unchecked violence. What should have been the happiest time of his life was stolen from him and from those who loved him. But Vincent Chin's story didn't end with his death. It became a rallying cry, a moment that galvanized the Asian American community and forced the nation to confront its deep-seated prejudices. The fight for justice was only beginning. This expanded version incorporates Vincent Chin's background, the socio-political climate of Detroit, and the detailed events of the night of June 19, 1982, to provide a fuller picture of the tragedy and its context.